Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Ryan Irvin with Unionet's Customer Success Team. Today, we're going to cover the topic of expense reports. If you have questions, please type them into the questions box on your webinar dashboard, and we will review them all at the end. This webinar will be recorded and will be available online within a week in case you want to review it again or share with someone else on your team. All of our webinars are located on our Knowledge Center. You can find them by typing the title of the webinar in the search box. If you experience audio or visual issues, please try leaving and rejoining the webinar or try using a different audio option. I'd like to give a quick recap of the customer success role. Your customer success manager is your main point of contact within Unionet. Our role is to help our customers optimize their use of Unionet as well as provide general account support. This includes communication on renewals, new products, events, etc. Please feel free to reach out to your customer success manager for any Unionet questions. If you don't know your customer success manager, please contact us at our general email, csm@unionet.com. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. We're happy to have Gwen Hess from Unionet University to present. Gwen, are you ready?
Sure am. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're able to join us today on our webinar, another in our Diagnose and Remedy series, where today we're talking about expense reports and different things that we want to take a look at in regards to them, as we might have questions or issues that come up from time to time, and we want to be able to know how to address and resolve those pretty easily. Today, we're going to be going over primarily these 6 items. We're going to look at, well, what type of expense type should I be using? We're going to look at how we can limit what expense types are available for use. We're going to look at what's a threshold. What is that? How does it work? We're also going to be able to tell the status of an expense report so that we're going to know where it is in the process and what we might be expecting to happen as next steps. Along with that sort of approval workflow, well, do we actually have the right person approving? How do we tell who it is that's approving and make sure that we actually have the right individuals approving each of those different types of expense reports? We're also going to talk about how to correct an inaccurate expense report. So these are the main areas that we're going to be going over. At the end, I've got a little bonus slide with a few other things that might be of interest to you in regards to expense reports. So I'm kind of going to take each of these items one by one. We're going to review what it means. We're going to go into Unionet and take a look at it within our demo system. And then I'm also going to give you some links that you can go to for reference from our Knowledge Center and our help docs. And as Ryan said, in about a week's time, this recording is going to be available to you on our Knowledge Center. But also, we're going to put a copy of this slide deck up there as well, because I have included clickable links to those areas in the Knowledge Center and the help docs. And that way, you'll have those as handy items that you can reference as you need them, or maybe even bookmark some of them if there are things that you know you'll need to go to from time to time. So with that, let's move on. So when we're thinking about these things that we might run into in regards to expense reports, again, we were talking about, well, there's like this long list of expense types when I go in to enter an expense report. How do I know what's the right one to use? Also, maybe we want to limit which expense types are available based upon an individual and based upon a project. And really, it's the intersection of those two that we're going to be looking at. Again, what thresholds might we set in the system? This example I'm showing here says airfare, $1,000. Does that mean if I have airfare over that, you know, I'm in trouble or I can't get reimbursed for that? We'll take a look at that. We're also going to look at how do I know what the status is of an expense report? And like I said, do I have the right person even looking at it? And that final topic we said we'll go over is, how do I correct something that is inaccurate? Do I actually have to start all over again? Not really. We're going to talk about how to get there. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and look at that first item, which is what expense type are we going to use? Now, I noted that we had a drop down in our expense reports that tell us a long list of types. And sometimes that can be a little bit confusing. Depending upon how your administrator may have set up your system, you might have some limitations on what's being able to be seen, and that's one of the topics we're going to talk about today. But maybe you have a lot of things that are available to you, and you kind of wonder, which one should I be picking? So with that, I want to give you a little bit of an example of how we might make a determination of which one that I want to use. So here I am in Uninet, and I have I'm on my expense dashboard, and I'm looking at my expense reports I have out there. And I'm just going to go ahead and edit one of these that I have, and I can see that I have, again, a lot of different expense types that are available to me. Well, one thing is when expense types are being set up, you can actually put some information on the expense type that can help your end user. So if you happen to be a Uninet admin in your system that can go in and go to admin setup and make changes to your expense types, for example, you know, I could go in here and I could have some additional information at the top of, say, my airfare. So if I wanted to show, and I'm going to show you this a little bit later, I could actually put some other information up here at the top that could guide people. The other thing is understanding and being able to document for your users, because some people use all of these different sort of flavors of lodging expense types, and some only use certain ones. But you'll want to be able to know what it is that you're actually going to want or need for your individuals. I'm going to focus on the lodging ones just to give you some examples. So let's say that I just had a regular old lodging. This is not something that I have to go to for per diems. I just basically am going to fill out the information for that stay. So this might be when you go to a conference or something. You know, you're not worried about staying within a certain per diem limit. So you would just fill it out, save it, and you're pretty much done with what you want there. A lot of times we will go to this one that's called lodging per diem. And then when we're filling that one out, we have a different wizard. And here is where we are also having to come in, and I know that my receipt is required. I've got a vendor that is required that it tells me, and I might fill that out. Of course, I'm telling when I checked in and how many days I stayed. I'm going in and selecting things like, where was this to? And retrieving that information and picking the city. And then I'm giving it information in regards to how much I actually spend. It's telling me what I was allowed, and now I'm going to say how much it actually cost me per night. I put all that information in, and when I do that, I get two rows that show up. And these are flagged to be able to say, yes, I've gone over, but I've kept to the per diem rate. Oops, excuse me. It went back in the wizard. I've kept to the per diem rate amount, and then my overage shows up on another line. That's when I use this lodging per diem as the expense type. Sometimes our contracts, though, says, you know, I know that you're going to have difficulty finding something within the allowable amount. So I'm going to let you go ahead and put that entire amount to bill back onto the contract. If that be the case, we're going to pick that lodging per diem allowable. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put basically the exact same information that I put on the other one. I'm going to go pick my Orlando, Florida at $200 a night. Oops. And my $21 a day tax. And then I'm going to save that. And what this does, it still flags it, but it includes an entire amount on one row. So that's really the difference of those. So what you need to be able to understand is when I have an expense type, what does it particularly mean that I'm going to be filling out? What are the reactions in which that is going to come forth? So if I want to think about that, if I'm an administrator and I'm thinking about that from setting up an expense type, I'm going to go over to our, to our expense types. I think I have that somewhere here open already. Sorry, give me just a moment. I'm going to open that up in another tab. So if I'm over here on my admin setup expense types, I can say, for example, that lodging over per diem, which is going to coincide here with that second row. If I'm not allowed to bill that back to my customer, for example, I put that with a markup of a -100%. That allows me to then say, I'm not going to be billing this to my customer, but I am going to reimburse my employee for their out-of-pocket if they paid for it out of pocket. So it's a combination of kind of understanding the meaning behind the particular expense types. And again, as I said, utilize what you have setting on a particular expense type to give a little more information. If you're the Uninet admin in your system, you're able to come in and update these expense types and what's said there. For example, here I've said on this description, baggage fees are not to be included in this expense. Please place baggage fees on the baggage fee expense type. That gives my person a lot of information. But I also have to say, show description. Now that I've saved this, I'm going to go back over here to that expense report that I had and go back into this airfare one. And now you'll see I have that verbiage up here at the top because I said to show that description. So if you want to be able to utilize internal policy information or additional directions that you want to give to your user, use that description field. And again, you have to be a Uninet admin to update that expense type, but you can do that and say, show this up at the top. So if you have, maybe you have someone who's utilizing different types of these lodging expense types, add some descriptors onto there. Give them guidance, because you don't want people to be trying to figure out what it is that they need when you can very easily give them the verbiage right on the screen for them to know what your intent is for them to follow. Okay. So with that, what I'd like to do is just go back over to my presentation here for a moment. And again, like I said, I'm going to provide this to you on the Knowledge Center because there are these clickable links that are going to be available to you. So you can go into the Knowledge Center and read a lot more about expense types. And you can also go into our help docs. Think of the Knowledge Center as being sort of the frequently asked questions, best practices, a little bit more of a tutorial on how to utilize that. And think of the help docs as being something that is a little bit more of how the system is viewing the particular fields. Use them in tandem with one another. You'll always get to where you need to be. So now let's talk about being able to limit which expense types are available to be used. I'm going to just show this screenshot again of where we went in, and there are a whole lot of different things that are available, but I'm also going to show you this one. This is for a different user. This is Chad user. And now he is in here, and he only has 3 things available to him. Well, how did we make that list go from something long and perhaps confusing, or at least I've got to stop and think a lot about what I'm doing, to something that's much more manageable? Let's talk about how we do that in Uninet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here to Uninet. And again, if you are a Uninet system admin, you have the ability to make updates and changes in your system. I'm just going to look over here at Chad user. That's the person we were looking at on that little screenshot on the slide. And I see that I have set up the optional abilities to have employee types. Employee types allow us to limit pay codes and expense types for our users. Chad, I've put him into a group that I call salaried. So if I go in and as a system admin, I am on my admin setup employee type screen, and I'm editing the one that I have named salaried, I have the ability to say, these are the expense types that are available to someone who is a part of this particular employee type. So we saw that Chad is a part of this employee type group, so he has this listing of expense types available to him. But you say, wait a minute, Gwen, on that screenshot you showed me, there were only 3 expense types available. Well, that's because you can also limit at the project level which expense types are available. So here I'm on this particular project, 10.StudyX, and in the left navigation area, again, I would have to be a Uninet admin or a project manager to be able to make these types of updates to the project. I can limit which expense types are available to this project. Now you notice there are 5 here that are available, but Chad only had 3 on that screenshot. And in fact, I'm not going to switch over into a different browser here because I'm logged in as Chad user here. And what I want to do is I want to show you on his expense report here that we've got, that when he goes over, and again, he has selected this 10.StudyX project, is what he's putting against, he has business meals, mileage, and parking tolls available. What I want to point out to you is, while, let me bring it up again, while business meals, mileage, and parking tolls are available, subcontractor expense and supplies and other ODCs are not available here. And that's because in my employee type group that Chad's a member of, he does not have subcontractor expenses and supplies and ODCs available in his listing. So it's the intersection of what you have limited via employee type with the intersection of what you have limited at your project. And then that results that Chad is able to have these 3 expense types available to him to put expenses against for this particular project. That's a great way to ensure that people don't pick something that you don't want them to pick because either one, it doesn't make sense for the type of user that they are, for example, to be putting in subcontractor expenses, because this is just an end user. He's made a trip to the client site. He had some mileage, he had some parking, he had some tolls, he bought lunch. That's all he needed to put on there. Also, your contract might vary, that you have with any particular client of yours, might very well state in it, these are the only things you're allowed to bill back. These are the only type of expense types you're allowed to have on that. So again, from a project perspective, we limited it as well. And it's only the intersection of those 2 that are available here for Chad to pick on his expense report. Really neat, wonderful, powerful way to limit what is there. And guess what? That really makes your approval process all the more easy because you've already let the system take care of some of those limitations for you. So again, if I go back over here, I've given you a box with actually 4 different entries, 2 that are within the Knowledge Center and 2 that are within the Help Docs to help guide you if you are trying to set up these sorts of limitations within your Uninet so that you can make sure that people are only accessing that to which they have the right to access, and also it's going to help improve your approvals. So our next topic is in regards to thresholds. So what is a threshold and how does it work? Well, again, if you're a Uninet admin in your system, when you are working with your expense types, you have the capability of setting thresholds up on different expense types. In essence, saying, and in this example, airfare, I've set a threshold of $1,000. Business meals, I've set a threshold of $50. And on materials, I've set a threshold of $5,000. So what does that mean? Well, that means that when I want to go into my Uninet and put in an expense report for any particular thing, if I happen to go in excess of that threshold amount, and remember business meals, I had a $50 amount, it's going to give me a flag here. And it says, this is in excess of the threshold. Now, when I go to save this, it's going to let me save it, but it's also going to tell me I need to enter a comment as to why I went over that threshold amount. When I submit it, and yes, it will allow me to submit it, it is then going to say that I am going to need to, the approver is going to see that flag as well, which just is a visual cue to them that I need to take a look at that because it is in excess of it. I'll also note that when you go into the wizard to make an entry for that expense line item, it will tell you at the top if there is a threshold and what it is. And you'll see that up at the top in red. So I would know if I was going to be in excess of that. And so if you train your people appropriately, they'll know that if you have a threshold and they go over it, they can go ahead and enter that comment right here and now. I mean, the system will stop them from going any further when they try to save, but at least, they could know to do it here. And again, they can still submit it, but the approver is still going to see the flag, and they're going to know, let me take an extra look at that line item. Again, I'm going to give you some information in your setup in the help docs on this clickable link. Actually, let me just take a real quick step over into Uninet because we were looking at these expense types over here. And you'll notice that when I'm in admin setup, again, I have to be an administrator, and I'm doing my expense types, I have the ability here to set that threshold. And you just merely type in the number. Also, when you're on your expense report and actually entering, there is a threshold button down here. And when you do that, it merely gives you the pop-up window that lists out the expense types, and you can see whether or not there's a threshold for that particular instance or not. Okay, let's move right along. And we're going to talk about how to tell what is the status of an expense report. Well, a couple of ways in which we'll do this. If I am an end user and I want to know what's the status of my expense reports, I can run the user expense status report. And you'll see that that's going to give me a listing of, based if I ran it for beginning of time to end of time in this demo system. So I have a longer list here. And it tells me the voucher number or the expense report number, how much it was, how much I got it reimbursed back to me, because maybe not everything on that expense report was something that I paid for out of pocket. So it tells me the total number, and then we get over here, and this is the status, because we're saying, how do I tell the status? Well, extracted, these are ones that are already done and have been sent down to a downstream system. Maybe I got reimbursed via the payroll system, or maybe I'm not currently using Uninet Financials, and I had to send that information downstream. The Uninet admin had to do an export and send that down and mark it as extracted. I also can see my other statuses. I have two of them that are in use, and just like timesheet statuses, expense reports have the exact same statuses. So these are ones that I'm currently entering, but I haven't yet submitted. I've got one that's been disapproved, so I probably want to go and take a look at that and see what's going on. I might need to make some corrections so I can submit that again. But I also see that I have one that's in the submitted state. And I can look over here on the far right of that screen, and I can see the pending approvals. Who am I waiting on that needs to approve that before that I'm going to know I'm going to get reimbursed? So this tells me that I know that Fran, the CFO, is who I am waiting on for that. So that gives me, as the end user, a lot of information. But maybe I'm not the end user. Maybe I am the manager who's wanting to get some information on expense reports that I know that are out there in the system that I need to be taking care of or approving. So there's another version of this report that is going to be from the perspective that a manager would run it. So let's go over to Uninet just real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and open up in my reports dashboard over here. If I'm a manager, I probably want to go and look at the people reports. So I'm going to look at my people expense status, report status. I can come in here and I could look at only those that I am approving. They're in my approval group, or maybe those that I'm approving, and maybe I'm an alternate for someone else. So I could look at that wider scope, or maybe I'm someone who can see more a more broader group. So maybe I have the capabilities of running a report for everybody in my division or everybody in the company. So I might say, let me look at that. And then I could come down and I could say, well, show me reports in, well, wait a minute, why can't I include these other statuses? These are grayed out. Doesn't look like it's going to run it. I know what I need to do. I need to come up here to include expense reports, and I need to say, let me look at things that have a line item date within the range that I'm looking. Because if I'm not cognizant of the meanings of these different radio buttons, I could very well come in here and not have anything returned. So for example, let's say that I had left this as the default of using expense report within completion range. And I said, I'm just interested in looking at the current month. And I run this report, I didn't find anything. Okay, well, maybe that expense report was for last month. So I say, well, let's run it for our previous and current month. Yeah, that's probably where that is. And I run it, and I don't have any data. Well, wait a minute. I know that we were entering some reports for Chad user and for myself in here logged as Frank controller. Where are those? And that's because, again, I need to be able to know that maybe I want to look for line item date within range because it hasn't yet been submitted. And now I can come down here and say, give me some other statuses. And now when I look for that, I start seeing other things. Because the default says, let me go and look at approved expense reports. I need to be able to view other statuses, so I need to be looking at the line item. And now I'm seeing a lot of things that are out there in use. I'm looking at things that are submitted. I can see who it's waiting on approvals for in all of these cases. I have a lot more info. If I'm on Uninet Financials and there are vendor invoice information in here, I have that here as well. So I'm able to see a little bit more because now I'm in here as a manager looking at different statuses. One other thing that I'll note here is we can also look at a detailed view. And here we can see how it's been approved, if it has at all. And I can say, let me see some of the attachments. Maybe I want to bring in some other statuses as well here. And when I do this, and it tells me it's complete, and I hit OK, then I can come down and see more details. And if there's an attachment to it, well, I can just click that right here, and I can see the attachment. So this has helped me out a lot in knowing what I might see or do or have access to knowing what is the next step that needs to be taken on expense reports. And again, in the help docs, I've given you information specific to that end user expense status report, as well as to the people expense status report. That way, if you're needing to run reports on people, you'll have access to that as well. And there's just a screenshot of that other view of the people expense status report. Okay, so now the next question was, well, how do I know that I have the right person to approve? Do I just need one person approving an expense report? Or if he's not the right person, is she the right person? Or maybe I need to have both of them approve an expense report. So a way that we can find out who we've got set up and make some determinations, by analyzing that data of, do I have the right people, is we have the approval group reference report that we can go and take a look at. And so this is one area that we can go to. And let's go ahead and go back over into Uninet and take a look at that. Again, so if I'm on my reports dashboard, I think we're usually used to looking at a lot of things here in the middle of the page, but in the sub-menu up here, there's an item called reference. Now again, depending upon the role that you have in Uninet, you may or may not be able to see things up here that are in the reference. I'm in as a system administrator, so I can definitely see everything up here. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at the approval group details report. I'm just going to go ahead and run this for everyone in the system. I could limit it if I wanted to. But here I'm able to see I've got expense approval groups, and the left-hand column tells me who the approvers are. If the name is in parentheses, that is the alternate approver for that. So in fact, let's just go back and look for ones that have expense in the name, which I can do that. I can say, well, let me look for approval groups that have expense in their name. And that'll limit this report a little bit. So I see that over here, I've got Chris Director and Frank Controller. This one's got Grace Director and Frank Controller. This one here just has my Fran CFM, and then I've got, CFO rather, and then I've got Sally Subapprover and Frank Controller. Well, why do I have Frank Controller on all of these? This is an expense that is being approved. Frank Controller is the controller of my company. He's in my finance group. I want him to see anything that has to do with accounts payable. So I want to make sure that he is a person who is going to be seeing all the expense reports. So even though I might have their manager or their supervisor as the first person who's approving an expense report, I've got Frank as being the one who's seeing the final. You say, that makes a lot of sense, Gwen, but what about that one down here where Fran's the only one that's doing the approval? For DCAA compliance, you cannot approve your own. And if I look over here and see who are the members of this approval group, Frank is a member of this approval group. So when he submits expenses, Fran is the one who is approving them, but he cannot come in now and approve his own. So that's why he's not the second approver in this approval group. Now this report's just a quick way to be able to show that. If I were the system admin and wanted to come in here and change how that looked, I could come in here under admin setup and go to approval groups and go to any particular one that I wanted to update. And on the approvers tab, this is where I would search for the people over here that I want to be the approver. They must have the manager role, by the way, in order to be selected to be an approver. And then I just move them over here. Now these up and down arrows here say who approves first. I've got Frank in the second approval slot because I want them to end with him as the controller. But if I needed to come in here and change anything, I could highlight the name and I could move him up and say he's going to approve first and then Grace would. But we know that's not how we want to do it for this because we want it to all end up in the finance group. Now, optionally, your projects can have project level approvals on them also for expenses or time, either way. So again, this is more of an internal decision because project level approvals are optional. You don't have to have them. But if you wanted that in the administrator grouping on this left navigation panel of a project, again, you'd have to be an administrator or project manager to come in here and make these decisions. You could select someone to be a project approver, select them here, and then state whether they are going to approve time or expense or both. So you do have the option of having a project level approval as well. Again, I've given you some links to help you understand a little bit more about approval groups, but I also have given you something that's a little bit more in-depth on approvals, and we really don't have time in this particular webinar to go in depth. There is something called an approval authority sequence, or in the help docs, we refer to them as the dynamic approval sequence. And what this does is it allows you to say, I have certain managers that have certain thresholds of approval. So if I have an approval threshold of $500 and Frank Controller has an approval threshold of $5,000, let's say that something comes in for, $400, I can approve it. We know it's going to end up with Frank anyway, but if I had anybody else in between that had a different level, we could bypass them. It would just end up going to Frank as the final approval. But if it's for, let's say, $4,000, it would come to me first as the supervisor manager to approve it, but then it would have to go on to someone who had the higher level of a financial approval as well. So I would suggest you spend some time looking at these particular entries as well if you have a need to have those particular levels of approval within your company. Now, how do we correct an inaccurate expense report? So from time to time, we go in and things aren't correct. And oops, I need to update it. Well, let's talk about that. We know that when we are doing timesheets, if we think back to a timesheet, if a timesheet has gone into a locked or extracted status, we do an adjustment. No such animal really exists for expense reports. So what I'm going to have to do for an expense report that has already been put into a locked or extracted status, I'm on my expense dashboard and I went to lists. I could come down here and I could see my completed ones. So let's say, for example, that this one here, I had something incorrect on. I cannot adjust it. But what I can do is I can put in another expense report that corrects this, if you will. So I'm going to go in and take a peek at this one. And let's just say that on this employee paid taxi shuttle down here, let's say that this should have been $100 instead of $166. Well, the easiest thing for me to do is to copy this report. So I could copy this one. I'm going to create a copied version of it. I can get rid of all these lines that I don't need because, remember, those were all okay. And so this one that should have only been $100 instead of $166, I can put the expense amount as being a minus 66. And I can put in a comment here that this, whoops, out of my, didn't mean to get that. I can come in here and I can correct this to say that this is to correct the amount on, and I probably would have captured my expense number previously on the previous expense report. I'd put something in here to let people know what it was in regards to. I can save this, and now I can submit the, whoops, need to update that. And so now I can submit this, and now I have submitted an expense report with a negative amount that's going to negate the difference on where I had made the mistake. So I don't really have to start all over. I can just copy the one I had, get rid of any lines I didn't need, update the one I did, and if I'd forgotten something, yeah, I could have added another line to it, but usually we're just correcting the lines that are within that particular one. So then this can go through its approval and through all of the regular steps that we would need and get to that. Now, there are a couple of things that you can do if an admin wants to do some sort of an export-import to create that negating amount, but I think it's just easy to kind of show the creation of the expense report to do that. But I do have those links for the Knowledge Center that I'm putting here for you on how do I correct, negate, or delete an expense amount. And then I've also given you the Help Docs link for working with expenses, because both of these are going to take you through the steps that you would need to be able to correct an expense report. Okay, before we head on to questions, I do want to give you a few other pieces of handy information, and these are all going to be links available to you on this deck when it's attached onto the Knowledge Center page. So one thing I want to talk about is very often you might have a user, or you yourself might say, well, I don't have a project. My project's not appearing in my expense report. So why is that? So we could click onto this link, and then that's going to go ahead. Hopefully it's going to pull up my page here for me. Somewhere I thought it would go ahead and I'd pull it over. Oh, there we go. So this is going to go ahead and pull up to here and give us the reasons why. So it's kind of a step-by-step. How can I make sure that I am looking for those? And sometimes it's just as simple as that when I'm on my expense dashboard, sometimes I don't have all the projects pulled over that I need. And I just need to go to the My Projects and pick something and bring it over to the right-hand side. But your link is going to take you into that and explain to you how the many different reasons that you might have. So let's look at another one. Maybe you're like, well, I don't really feel like my users are well trained. Well, there's a Knowledge Center entry that really just is going to take you to your end user expense training. And so if I just came back over here and said, I'll just go to it this way, be able to find it might be a little bit easier. And so here's my end user expense training. So maybe I just want to direct some people to come here and read this Knowledge Center entry so they know how to move forward and create an expense report in the correct way. Another thing that we might encounter is, well, really, what are some of the best practices on expense entry? And we will find those here in this area as well. So actually go over here and click this. Might be the easiest way to get to that screen. And this is actually a quick video that you could come to that page and watch that is going to take you through. Really, these are the best practices for standard expense entry. Then a couple more things I wanted to bring forward to you is, if you weren't aware, you can do your expense reports on any smart device. So there's an entry that goes over mobile expense entry. And really what I think is the coolest part of that is, we'll be out there at that business dinner, or at, we've just taken a cab and we've got that receipt in our hand. And while we're going to turn in that paper receipt, we also want to sort of capture that information right here and now. You can take a photo with your smartphone, with your tablet, whatever, and then you can attach to your expense report. You can bring your expense report right up on that smart device and attach that photo, and there's your documentation attached right then, right now. So that is a wonderful, handy little trick to do. Then the last thing is really, I want to bring to your attention that if you are doing project costing within your Uninet, so you have set up a cost structure and you've got your indirect rate set up and the like. If you have to create a new expense type, you need to make sure that you go back in and map any new expense types to the cost elements that you have for your cost structure. So you'll have to go into your cost structure and add that, because if you don't, then someone could utilize that expense type and it would not be mapped. And so that's just kind of one of those things I know our support team gets a lot of calls in regards to, of helping of our support team helping to resolve those issues. So just remember, if you're a Uninet admin and you have to create a new expense type and you're doing project costing, you need to go into your cost structures and map that new cost element. Also, if you've got employee types that you're utilizing, you're going to have to map it to your employee types as well. And you may also be needing to add that to projects, because remember we talked about limiting them on all those levels. Okay, so with that, we're up to time for questions. Ryan, have we had any questions come in?
We had a lot of questions, so I'll just go through one by one.
Okay.
The first one, when using credit card generic upload settings, is there a way to upload expense type for expense reports? Okay,
so when you are setting up your credit cards, so let's go back over into Uninet. Let me just quickly see if we are set up in this environment for our credit cards for that. I don't know that I have that set up in this environment, so I might not be able to quickly answer your question. You can say that certain things are going to map, and it will try to do some smart mapping, I think, across to that. You know, like if you see something from American Airlines, it might try to map that to your airline type. I think actually that's going to be a little bit more of an in-depth question for us to have an answer to. So I'd suggest that what we do is, I know after these webinars, our CSM team is going to go ahead and send answers out to anything we didn't answer here. And so I think actually we probably want to put some screenshots and some particulars together to answer that question.
All right, we'll send a note to their CSM. The next question, when you were on page 7, there was a question, does this assume they are making all their own arrangements when you were putting in an expense for, I think it was air?
Oh, okay. Well, you may or may not be utilizing expense requests in your system. Some people do. And so when you may have done a pre-authorization and then copied that over, or you may have had somebody else, maybe an office manager or a travel company that you're contracted with to take care of your travel, making the arrangements for you. However, let's think about what this looks like if we're trying to ascertain the costs to a project. So if I am doing travel because it's a billable project and this travel is billable back to that project, you would have to determine internally how you want to capture those costs against that project. I'm going to make an assumption here that some of the people on the call might be on financials, Uninet financials, and some may not. If you are not on Uninet financials, and I'm not going to speak to the financials piece of it here, if you have a specific financials question, then I'd ask those individuals to reach out to their CSM. But let's say that you're on like a project tracking or a project portfolio license type, and somebody else is making those arrangements. You still want to show on your expense report that you had that type of, you know, something occurred, like airfare. Maybe that was company paid because an external or your office manager, someone made those arrangements. But you probably are trying to track that amount that was spent to that project because you are ultimately management is interested in looking at the costs to that project versus what you're billing. And also you might be invoicing this directly out of Uninet and wanting to include all these costs as well on that invoice. So either the individual is coming in and saying, okay, for that trip I made to New York, here are all my charges, but maybe most everything was something that was company paid. Or you may have someone in your office who is entering those things that have been made elsewhere. You know, that external travel company, maybe my office manager is making those entries and putting them against the appropriate projects. You have to decide internally what's going to be the way you're going to handle that.
All right, the next question was, is there an admin role specifically for expenses?
No, there's not.
And the next one, what happens when a particular expense type is not mapped to a project type and someone tries to use it?
Okay. When a particular expense type is not mapped, you don't, you're not really mapping it to a project type. Project types are at the project level, and you're either saying that the project is of a particular project type, or if you're using tasks, you may have done an override at the task level to have a different project type. I think perhaps the question was saying if I am utilizing cost structures, so I'm doing project costing, and over here I have something that is not mapped, like baggage fees. I added baggage fees today before our session, just to be able to show you that we can have things that when we add them, they end up over here. They're not mapped. So what you have to do is when you add a new expense type, you have to come in here and say, okay, which of my ODC cost elements is that applicable to? It makes sense that this would be travel, and I would move it over and save it. However, if I had forgotten to come in here and do this, and someone has entered in expense reports and that's not yet been mapped, it's not going to pick it up in your cost structure. So what you have to do is you need to contact our support team, and they can restamp the expenses if you have missed your mapping of one over. And there's a Knowledge Center entry on that too. It's something like SQL for expense. I think it's something like that. There is an entry. Look, let me go back in. I have the ability to get to a lot more stuff than over here. So we're going to say, I know I was looking at this entry earlier today. Now I can't remember the phrase that I used to search for it because I was showing it to someone as well. But there is a Knowledge Center in regards to that. Why don't you go ahead and move to the next question? I'll find this entry here real quick.
All right, and we're running low on time, so
okay.
That's the question. Can we set a threshold for items with no receipts?
Yes. Yeah, you can set a threshold for item that those are two independent areas of each other. Checking the receipts required box is independent of the threshold.
All right, I guess we have a little more time. We'll go through some more. For lodging over per diem, the customer wants to map to a different project. They have separate unbillable projects, and they're asking how they do it. Currently, they're making a journal entry to reclass it.
Okay. Well, you know, one thing that you could do, let's think about this. There's a couple different things that come to mind. So if I'm in admin setup and I'm on my expense types and I have my overage, you know, if I'm using Unit Financials, I mean, I could put that to a different account here. I'm not actually putting it to a different project, but I could put it to a different account. One thing that you could possibly do, if you really wanted it to be on a different project in and of itself, you might do an export of that data and import it back into the other project. But I don't know that it's going to actually let you do that, the overage by itself, because these two work in tandem with one another. Your per diem and your lodging over per diem. In fact, if we were to go in and look at this and we're looking at our wizard, we are saying that we're going to record the overage somewhere else. So I don't really know if it would let you put it that way. Let's take that as one of those we'll do some research on, Ryan, and get back to them on that.
All right, sounds good. I'll make a note for that one. For any of the leftover questions, we'll send them all to your customer success managers, and they'll follow up with you with answers. And this is our CSM team. Again, our goal is to help you reach your business goals. If you're not sure who your CSM is, please email csm@uninet.com, and your customer success manager will contact you. Thanks, Gwen, for the great content and Q&A. Once again, the webinar presentation will be available within a week. And for those of you who have questions we didn't get to, you should see those responses soon from your CSM. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.